start with a report on India's shifting nuclear posture. For the first time since India officially became a nuclear power, it has more warheads than Pakistan. But India's focus is now on China, and there's a change in New Delhi's nuclear preparedness. Does that mean that India is ditching its no first use policy? We look at the statements and developments to bring you the full picture. Meanwhile, a top-level delegation from the US is in Dharamshala in India to meet the Dalai Lama, putting Tibet back on the geopolitical radar and upsetting China no end. Also looking at the power play in the Korean Peninsula, where Vladimir Putin is visiting Pyongyang after 24 years. The making of the EU-China trade war featuring electric vehicles and pork. The Biden-Trump battle of advertisements in the run-up to the US presidential election, the political crisis in Thailand and the military's role in it. Why America has sued Adobe, exposing the dark side of the subscription economy. How India's revival of the historic Nalanda University can be a step towards turning the country into a hub of learning. But there are challenges along the way. How French footballers are kicking up controversy with their political opinion. And are you feeling the heat? The whole world, it seems, is battling intense heat waves. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. 40 airports across India receive a bomb threat email. This includes Delhi, Chennai, Coimbatore, Jaipur and Patna airports. The mass threat led to chaos and flight delays. Security has been tightened at all airports. A preliminary inquiry has revealed that an unknown sender had emailed the same bomb threat. US President Joe Biden's immigration gambit. He will unveil rules which will allow undocumented spouses of US citizens to obtain permanent residency status. This could benefit nearly 500,000 immigrants. Immigration is a critical issue for many Americans ahead of the presidential election in November. Is Ukraine behind the oil tank attacks in southern Russia? Sources say Ukrainian forces launched a drone attack that set several oil storage tanks ablaze in Russia. Kiev has carried out similar attacks on Russian energy facilities before. Moscow has also launched dozens of devastating attacks on Ukrainian power plants. Kenyans protest controversial tax hikes outside their parliament. Police fired tear gas and arrested a dozen demonstrators. But the cash-strapped government has defended the move. It comes as the East African economic powerhouse battles a cost of living crisis. London regains its stock market crown. It is once again Europe's biggest stock market by valuation. The London Stock Exchange reclaimed its position from Paris as France struggles with political turmoil. Paris had been Europe's biggest stock market since early 2023. Sri Lanka's highest court blocks a gender equality bill. The judges said it could set a legal precedent to decriminalize homosexuality and same-sex marriage. Now, President Ranil Wickremesinghe wants to appoint a select committee to overrule the judiciary. And singer Justin Timberlake arrested. He is accused of driving while intoxicated on Long Island in New York. The pop star is currently on tour. He is scheduled to perform in Chicago this weekend. We begin tonight with a riddle. What can prevent wars but also destroy our planet? The answer is nukes, nuclear weapons. They have changed the dynamics of geopolitics. They've made our world safer and more dangerous at the same time. So tonight we're looking at India's nuclear policy. What shaped it? Is it changing? And why is it changing? But first, some context. In 1998, our neighborhood changed forever. India and Pakistan conducted nuclear tests. They announced themselves as nuclear powers. The world was shocked. Bill Clinton was US president back then. He called South Asia the most dangerous place on earth. It's been more than 2 decades now. India has exercised its power responsibly. But its nuclear posture is changing. Let me pull up a new military report. It tracks the number of nuclear warheads that each country has. India has 172 warheads, 172. Now, this is a very important number. Pakistan has 170. Since 1998, Pakistan has always had more nukes than India. Just look at these graphs. In 2001, India had around 32 nukes and Pakistan had around 36. By 2005, Pakistan's arsenal increased to 40. India was at 35. From 2005 to 2015, Pakistan's arsenal grew 3 times, from 40 to 120, and India's from 35 to 110. As you can see, India was always behind Pakistan. This changed in the latest report. Pakistan's arsenal did not expand in the last year, but India seems to have added 8 warheads. It's a catchy fact, isn't it? India overtakes Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. But that's not the story here. Pakistan's nuclear policy still remains the same, and that is to deter India. But India's policy has evolved. It is now focused more on China than Pakistan. Beijing is the 3rd largest nuclear power in the world. They have 410 nuclear warheads, more than twice India's arsenal. So India's nuclear expansion is not directed at Pakistan. It's more about deterring China. And there are 3 aspects to this. The first is obviously the sheer numbers. India's arsenal has expanded 72% since 2014, 72% growth. The second is delivery. India can fire a nuke from the sea, land and air. Many of our fighter jets are nuclear capable, like the Mirage, Jaguar and Rafales. They can fire nukes from the sky. Then you have land-based missiles, the short-range Prithvi 2 and Agni 1, the medium-range Agni 2 and the intermediate-range Agni 3 and 4 missiles. A new version of the Agni missile was tested in April. It's lighter than the previous ones. And finally, you have the sea-based launchers. I'm talking about submarines like INS Arihant. They can fire nukes from the sea. Now, the point of these capabilities is quite simple. Say your enemy strikes first. They destroy your land-based nuclear missiles. How will you hit back? In this case, with your sea-based missiles. So the idea is to have more options in case you're attacked, which brings us to the 3rd aspect of India's strategy, and that is more preparedness. Usually, India keeps its nukes and launchers separately, sort of like keeping the bullets away from the gun. But reports say that could be changing. India is now putting its missiles inside canisters, basically loading the gun. Experts think that this could be a more aggressive posture, a sign of more readiness. Now, we've seen political indications of that. In 1999, India announced a no first use policy, meaning India will only use nuclear weapons if hit by another nuclear weapon. India won't fire the first shot. That was the policy. But recently, Indian leaders have suggested a rethink, like Defence Minister Rajnath Singh. Look at his statement in 2019. I'm quoting, India has strictly adhered to the no first use doctrine. What happens in future depends on the circumstances. That's what the Defence Minister of India said in 2019. The circumstances have changed since then. India and China clashed in 2020. Both sides lost dozens of soldiers, and since then it's been a staring contest. India has deployed more than 50,000 soldiers in Ladakh. China too has a similar number there. Has this new equation forced a rethink in New Delhi? We haven't heard anything yet. But like all policies, a country's nuclear policy also evolves. Nukes have deterred countries from attacking India. But they come at a cost. The cost of an arms race and instability. So it will be a tough call for India's leadership.
China, China, China!
The Deng Xiaoping right now in Beijing, that he will take his troops and take the Chinese away from Tibet.
I have spent time with the Dalai Lama. I believe him to be an honest man, and I believe if he had a conversation with President Zhang, they would like each other very much.
An old political issue is back in the news. It was quite the rage in the 20th century, but then it lost traction. I'm talking about Tibet. In the last few years, most countries appeared to have moved on from it. But now they are back. Today, a US delegation arrived in the Indian city of Dharamshala. That's where the Dalai Lama lives, in Dharamshala. Now, this delegation is bipartisan, meaning it has both Democrats and Republicans. Among them is Nancy Pelosi. She's a former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. She's also a top Democrat. First, this delegation met with officials of the Tibetan government in exile. Then they visited the Tibetan parliament, and tomorrow is the main event, a meeting with the Dalai Lama. But why now? Listen to what the delegation had to say.
Our purpose of our visit is to reinforce the resolution that we signed and to visit His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
I am very excited to see His Holiness, to get some of his wisdom, to show that the United States of America is with him and that with our joint resolution are together.
It's all about solidarity. Earlier this year, the US Congress passed a new law. It's called the Resolve Tibet Act. And what does it do? This law puts pressure on China to hold talks with Tibetan officials to basically sort out this issue, an American law to force China. Now, just to be clear, that doesn't mean Tibetan independence. The Dalai Lama has given up on that demand. He now seeks a middle path. No independence, but more autonomy. That's what he wants. But will China agree? Well, the talks have been stalled since 2010. Xi Jinping came to power after that, after 2010, and his position has been even more radical. So do not expect any breakthroughs. As for this visit, China obviously is not happy about it. They have criticized any US contact with Tibetan officials.
As we
all know, the 14th Dalai Lama is not a pure religious figure, but a political exile who engages in anti-China separatist activities under the guise of religion. We urge the US to fully recognize the anti-China and separatist nature of the Dalai Lama group, abide by the commitment on Tibet-related issues, refrain from any form of contact with it, and stop sending wrong information to the outside world.
What's the larger picture here? What do we make of the US policy on Tibet? Well, this visit is not unprecedented. Nancy Pelosi herself has met the Dalai Lama before. She visited Dharamshala in the year 2008. Back then, she was also the House Speaker. But since then, Tibet has taken a backseat in Washington. Yes, US presidents have met the Dalai Lama, but the activism was missing. Instead, Washington focused on China's atrocities elsewhere, like Hong Kong and Xinjiang. So why is the focus back on Tibet? Well, one reason could be the Dalai Lama himself. He's 88 years old. He's clearly the most visible symbol of the Tibetan movement, and it's not clear who will succeed him. Normally, the Dalai Lama is said to reincarnate. That's what the Tibetans believe, that he will reincarnate. But the current Dalai Lama does not want to discuss it. He says he's not considering reincarnation yet. Meanwhile, the Chinese have hatched their own plans. They want to appoint their own Dalai Lama. Basically, usurp the Tibetan legacy. So this movement is facing an existential challenge. You cannot keep delaying the question of leadership. Maybe that explains the renewed focus. And it's not just the US. Other democracies are also speaking up, like India and the European Union. We told you about this last week. India is planning to rename 30 places in Tibet, like rivers, cities, and bridges. The plan is to give historical Indian names to these places in Tibet. Same with the European Union. Last week, an EU delegation visited Tibet. It was a rare move by the European Union. They flagged human rights concerns in the region. They also had a message for Beijing. Don't meddle in Tibet's religious affairs, especially in selecting the next Dalai Lama. Another example is Australia. They sent a parliamentary delegation to Dharamshala in March. Again, quite a rare move. But all of this could be a trailer, because the main event has not happened yet, a meeting between the Dalai Lama and the US president. It hasn't happened in a long time. Bill Clinton had met the Dalai Lama. George Bush met him too. So did Barack Obama. But Donald Trump did not. In fact, the Dalai Lama was quite critical of Trump. Biden too hasn't met the Dalai Lama as president, but he could have a chance this month. The Dalai Lama is traveling to the US for a surgery. His aides have not announced a meeting yet, but it's certainly possible. And all of this makes one thing quite clear. Tibet is back on the global agenda. Yes, it's a humanitarian and moral cause, but it's also a tool to put pressure on China. Unlike Xinjiang or Hong Kong, Tibet has recall value. It also has a rallying figure in the form of the Dalai Lama. Let's hope India also takes a cue from this. Prime Minister Modi has not met the Dalai Lama after taking office. The last such meeting was in 2010. That's when the Dalai Lama met the then Indian Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. So should Prime Minister Modi also take the plunge? If the policy is tit for tat, we do not see why not. Speaking of important meetings, here's another one that's making headlines and ruffling feathers. Vladimir Putin is set to meet Kim Jong-un. The Russian president is on a rare foreign trip. He is visiting North Korea. Not for the first time, though. Putin has been there before, way back in the year 2000. So his last visit was 24 years back when Kim's father, Kim Jong-il, was in charge. Putin was the president of Russia then too, in the year 2000. And now the junior Kim is at the helm in Pyongyang, and Putin is still the president of Russia, and he's on a trip that the world is watching closely. North Korea is going all out to welcome Putin. Reports say a large parade has been planned. And here's something that we must tell you here. North Korea is a hermit kingdom. It is disconnected from the world, and it has tight controls on the press. So the world relies on satellites to track what's happening in North Korea. And in the past few days, these satellites have captured some activity. In Pyongyang's Central Square, apparently a grandstand has been built there, and North Koreans have been practicing marching formations. This is what the satellites picked up. Then earlier today, a Russian journalist managed to reach Pyongyang, and he was able to send out a video through Telegram. This is what it shows, what Pyongyang looks like before Putin's arrival. So Putin is set to receive a grand welcome. The picture should be worth looking at. What about the conversations? What's on the agenda? What are the expectations? There's been a fair bit of speculation on this. Russia and North Korea are expected to sign a new treaty of friendship, and Kremlin has been dropping hints. Listen to this.
North Korea is our neighbor. It is a friendly country to us, with which we are developing bilateral relations. We will continue to do this. The potential for the development of our bilateral relations is significant. Again, we believe that our right to develop good relations with our neighbors should not be a concern to anyone and cannot, and should not be challenged by anyone.
We want to be friends and no one should challenge this. He's basically talking about the West, of course. They're not happy with this turn of events and deepening ties between Russia and North Korea. The West is not happy. You see, Pyongyang has supported Russia's war in Ukraine. In 2022, they made a deal. Russia wanted North Korean artillery. Pyongyang wanted food in exchange. So both sides agreed to a barter. And Pyongyang has kept its word. It sent more than 6,000 containers to Russia. They were filled with munitions. Earlier this year, South Korea released an estimate. It said that the North may have sent more than 3 million artillery shells or 500,000 122 rounds. These are shells that are used in howitzers usually. In return, Pyongyang got food, also some raw materials to keep its weapons factories going. So it was a win-win deal. Now a deeper partnership is on the horizon. And at the core of this will be military supplies. Russia wants 3 things from North Korea: more ammunition, construction workers, and soldiers to fight the war in Ukraine. In return, North Korea could ask for more food supplies from Russia and more support for their military plans, specifically North Korea's missile and satellite programs. They've been working on these for years now, and any kind of support from Russia would help them. But is Putin willing to go that far to help North Korea with military and tech transfers? Well, it's very much a possibility because Putin's list of friends is short at the moment. He counts North Korea as an ally. He wants stronger resistance against the West, and for that, he's ready to work with Pyongyang. Earlier this month, Russia took an aim at South Korea.
We observe with regret and concern the situation around the Korean peninsula that is escalating and degrading day by day. This step by South Korea leads to escalation and a significant increase in the risk of dangerous incidents.
You heard that. Moscow blames Seoul for the recent tensions on the Korean peninsula. This region has been on the edge. In fact, shots were fired as recently as today on the border between the two Koreas. The north is building anti-tank barriers. They are reinforcing roads and planting landmines. North Korean soldiers are involved in this construction activity, and South Korea says that they crossed the demarcation line this morning. That's the de facto border between the two Koreas. Soldiers from the north are said to have crossed it today, so the south fired warning shots, forcing them to retreat.
The North Korean military is carrying out various types of activities at the frontline area, including making barren land, planting landmines, reinforcing tactical roads, and installing unidentified structures which appear to be anti-tank barriers.
That's not all. Pyongyang has indulged in psychological warfare as well. It's been sending trash-filled balloons to the south. It's also using loudspeakers at the border to blast propaganda messages. So the biggest provocations, I must say, are the missile tests. North Korea has been upping its game. In 2023, they test-fired more than 30 ballistic missiles. This year, they've conducted 5 tests so far, and these tests raise the threat of a conflict. The US and South Korea have responded with military drills, but Pyongyang remains undeterred. Now imagine what happens if Russia steps in and provides military aid to Kim. It will completely change the power dynamics, not to mention the security situation in the Korean peninsula. Needless to say, the West is not enthused by the prospect.
We're not concerned about the trip. What we are concerned about, Trevor, is the deepening relationship between these two countries. Not just because of the impacts it's going to have on the Ukrainian people, because we know North Korean ballistic missiles are still being used to hit Ukrainian targets, but because there could be some reciprocity here that could affect security on the Korean peninsula.
A war on the Korean peninsula, the last thing that the world needs and the very last thing that the West can afford. They're already struggling to pay the bills for Ukraine. Putin's visit to Pyongyang is forcing them to consider all such scenarios.
अचानक ऐसे झटका लगा ना तो सब लोग एकदम हड़बड़ाहट से उठ गए।
न्यू जलपाईगुड़ी से जस्ट बैठे ही थे, अचानक जोर का झटका लगा।
कोई सोच भी नहीं सकता ना कि ऐसा कुछ हो सकता है।
जब हम लोग 2 से 3 मिनट में उतर करके देखे तो एक के ऊपर एक चढ़ा हुआ था डिब्बा।
सोई नहीं बाकी, मतलब ट्रेन चल रहा है फिर भी एक डर बैठ गया है ना, अभी हो सकता है। सुबह सभी लोग जैसे होते हैं, सुबह सो रहे थे हम लोग, अचानक ऐसे झटका लगा ना तो सब लोग एकदम हड़बड़ाहट से उठ गए। फिर हम लोग को सर में भी लगा बहुत, फिर हम लोग देखे कि इतना भयानक।
Are Europe and China headed towards a trade war? It increasingly looks like that. Europe fired the first shot last week. It imposed tariffs on Chinese electric cars. Now China has fired back. Its target is pork supplies from the EU. Beijing has launched an investigation into them. So it's EVs versus pork. Beijing has opened what it's calling an anti-dumping investigation. On what grounds? The same as Europe's complaints against Chinese cars. Here's what China says. Europe is dumping cheap pork into the Chinese market, and this is hurting domestic suppliers. The complaint has been filed by the China Animal Agriculture Association. Sounds like a nondescript body, but clearly they serve a political purpose because China's Commerce Ministry has responded swiftly to their complaint. The ministry says it will look into last year's pork imports from the EU. The investigation could take up to 1 year to finish, and it could be extended by another 6 months if the Chinese investigators want to.
In accordance with the relevant Chinese laws and regulations and World Trade Organization rules, Chinese domestic industries have the right to file an application to open an investigation into European dairy and pork imports to maintain normal market competition and order and safeguard their own legitimate rights.
This is obviously not a coincidence. It comes less than a week after Brussels made its move to limit the imports of Chinese EVs into Europe. They're grappling with an oversupply. Electric cars from China have been piling up at European ports. Some of them have been stuck there for as long as 18 months. Manufacturers are struggling to sell these cars now. So Europe wants to slow down imports. And how will they do that? By slapping a duty of up to 38% on Chinese cars. Beijing has been livid about this. It threatened to fight Europe with a lawsuit.
The actions by the European side are suspected of violating WTO rules and are naked protectionist behavior. China reserves the right to file a suit to the WTO and take all necessary measures to resolutely defend the rights and interests of Chinese companies.
So first, China talked about a legal battle. Now it has launched a probe into pork from Europe. It's a tit-for-tat move. The probe makes little sense otherwise. In 2023, China imported $282 billion worth of goods from the EU. $282 billion. Do you know what was the value of the pork imports? Less than $2 billion. And most of the supply came from just 3 countries. Spain, Denmark and the Netherlands. So pork is just a fraction of their overall trade, and targeting pork imports will not really hurt the EU financially. So this probe is about making a statement, a pressure tactic of sorts from Beijing to force European states to oppose the tariffs on Chinese cars. And Beijing has a small window of opportunity to do this. EU states get a vote on these tariffs. There are 27 countries in the European Union. If 15 of them oppose the plan, if 15 of them vote against the plan, it could be shot down. Perhaps that's what China is aiming for, to exploit divisions and political fault lines in Europe. And it's not unachievable, because there are already rumblings of dissent. Take Germany, for instance. It opposes EV tariffs on China. Spain, too, sounds concerned. It is one of the major sellers of pork to China. Yesterday, Madrid issued a statement. It said Spanish officials are working with the EU to avoid any counter tariffs on pork sales. The car industry, too, is pushing back against the plan.
The industry also made quite clear statements that tariffs, as suggested now by the EU, will not increase the competitiveness of the automotive industry. And therefore, we rather advocate for investing into the competitiveness of the European Union rather on trying to protect the auto industry. And I mean, you cannot protect the automotive industry only in the European Union if they are all over the world in all global markets.
It's a tricky challenge for Brussels. China's influence on Europe's automobile market runs deep. I'll give you another example. BYD is the biggest seller of EVs in the world. BYD is a Chinese company. It is also a sponsor for the Euros, the continent's premier football tournament. It's being sponsored by a Chinese car maker, not European auto giants, and that should tell you something. China plans to fight this back. It will challenge European tariffs, and if Europe fails to respond like a union, it will be a losing battle. Speaking of battles, the US is gearing up for the presidential kind, and the weapon of choice is ads. Political ads. Everyone is making them, from presidential campaigns to parties. Donald Trump drew first blood in this ad war. His political ads targeted Biden's age. They made fun of his tumbles. They attacked his military policies. And now Joe Biden is hitting back with a $50 million ad blitz. It shows Trump as a convicted felon, focusing on his many legal trials. So who is winning this ad war, and does it have a bearing on the election result? Well, political ads have always played a crucial role in American elections, especially in swaying the swing voters, which explains the amount of money they're spending. This year's ad bills could be around $16 billion in all. Our next report has more.
The ad starts with a little girl. She's holding a daisy. She's plucking the petals off it. But soon there's a countdown.
5, 4, 3, 2,
the countdown to a nuclear explosion. The world ends, and then comes a plate. Vote for President Johnson. No voiceover, no naming the opponent. But the ad suggested one thing. Johnson's opponent, Goldwater, could lead the country to nuclear war. And it worked. Johnson became president in 1964, and this advertisement changed the way political ads worked in America. It's been 60 years since then. We're in 2024. America is facing another presidential election, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, and political ads are more important than ever. Both the candidates know that, which explains Biden's new advertising blitz.
In the courtroom, we see Donald Trump for who he is. He's been convicted of 34 felonies, found liable for sexual assault, and he committed financial fraud. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's been working, lowering health care costs and making big corporations pay their fair share. This election is between a convicted criminal who's only out for himself and a president who's fighting for your family.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Character matters. That's what it's called. The 30-second ad highlights Trump's many legal woes. It shows him in the courtroom. It talks about the multiple cases against him. The message is quite simple. It's that Donald Trump is a convicted felon. Now, this is new for Joe Biden. It's his most aggressive campaigning against Trump and his criminal status. But it looks like Joe Biden had no other choice. He and Trump are tied in the latest poll. Both received 49% support. That puts the onus on the undecided voters, those who haven't decided who they'll vote for. Polls suggest Trump's conviction could play a huge role among the undecided voters. 21% say it's likely to make them not vote for Trump. 43% believe the verdict will only help Biden.
On January 6th,
looks like the US president wants to drive that point home. And he's spending a lot of money on it. This new ad is part of a $50 million advertising onslaught. It will focus on the swing states. Those are the states that can either vote Democratic or Republican. The new ads will target Black, Hispanic, and Asian American voters.
There is nothing more sacred than our democracy, but Donald Trump's ready to burn it all down.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
But it's not like Biden is the only one spending on ads. So is Donald Trump.
Carry yourself with dignity and pride. Demand the best from yourself and be totally unafraid to challenge entrenched.
He released this ad in February. He calls himself an outsider. He even asks his supporters to embrace being one.
That it can't be done, the more you should be absolutely determined to prove them wrong.
So both sides are coming up with scathing ads, which means a lot of money is being poured into these campaigns.
Whether you vote early, absentee, by mail, or in person.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
This year, nearly $16 billion will be spent on advertising. It's almost 30% more than what was spent in the 2020 elections. So the ad wars will only escalate this election season. So who will win it, Biden or Trump? Well, the jury is out. But the winner could very well bag the White House as well in November.
Are you ready to win this election?
Now let's turn our attention to Thailand, where a brewing political crisis was just delayed. Today was supposed to have been a landmark day at the courts. 3 different hearings took place. All of them had the potential to rock Thailand's political system and possibly cause mass protests. 3 Thai leaders were facing a reckoning. The sitting Prime Minister, Srettha Thavisin, a former Prime Minister, Thaksin Shinawatra, and the leader barred from becoming Prime Minister, Pita Limja Ruenarat. All 3 were in the crosshairs. The Thai courts were in fact hearing cases against all of them. Let's start with the case of Srettha, the sitting Prime Minister. He's a former real estate tycoon. He entered politics very recently, just last year. That's when he became a candidate for the Pheu Thai Party, the party that came second in the last general election, the one that happened last year. Srettha was the leader of this party. He was, in fact, not the leader of his party, but he was chosen as Prime Minister. He helms a coalition government comprising the populist Pheu Thai Party and a host of other pro-military and royalist parties. It's an uneasy arrangement because historically the Pheu Thai Party has been at odds with the Thai military. The military has orchestrated multiple coups in the past to oust Pheu Thai Party governments. So the current ruling coalition is a marriage of convenience, and the cracks are starting to show. Srettha's prime ministership is being challenged in court because he appointed a questionable advisor to his cabinet. The appointment sparked a political row, and 40 senators appointed by the military are seeking the prime minister's dismissal. The Thai courts heard the case today. The next hearing is scheduled for the 10th of July, so the current prime minister is still at risk. But he's in a better position than one of his predecessors, that's Thaksin Shinawatra. Thaksin has been indicted on a charge of royal defamation. Prosecutors say that he insulted the Thai monarchy back in 2015. That's when he's said to have insulted them. And the prosecutors want to imprison the former prime minister for this alleged slight. Now, Thailand is notorious for this, for its lèse-majesté law. Any perceived insult of the royal family can fetch a prison sentence, extending for up to 15 years per insult. 15 years per insult. People have been given decades in prison over this, just for making fun of the Thai royal family. And now Thaksin Shinawatra faces the same prospect. But the royal insult charge seems to be an eyewash, a convenient excuse to put pressure on Thaksin, and by extension, on the Pheu Thai Party, the same party that the current Prime Minister belongs to. Thaksin Shinawatra is the Pheu Thai Party's founder. His family still controls it. So the Shinawatra clan is said to be the real power in Thailand, not the current Prime Minister. And it seems that their opponents are not taking any chances. So both Srettha and Thaksin are fighting cases. It looks like a strong-arm tactic.
The case is lacking in various evidential aspects which we have tried to point out to prosecutors to consider. However, they have decided to overlook those missing parts and move forward with prosecuting us. Well, we're here to fight the case.
The courts have confiscated Thaksin's passport. He's out on bail, but he's not out of danger. His next hearing is on August 19th. Now we come to the third case, the one against Thailand's biggest opposition party. It's called the Move Forward Party. Now this is the party that won the election last year. They won about 30% of the vote. They were about to form the government with other non-military, non-royalist parties like the Pheu Thai. But Thailand's Senate intervened. The Senate is appointed by the military. They vetoed the winning party's bid, and they set off a chain reaction. Coalition partners were forced to break up. The current coalition was then formed with pro-military parties in power. Meanwhile, the winner, the Move Forward Party, now faces dissolution. Its very existence is being challenged. Today, Thailand's Constitutional Court set a hearing date, that is July 3rd. And this means that Thailand's largest opposition party has a few weeks left. Now, throughout this story, you would have noticed some common threads, a pattern, that the military and the royalists are pulling the strings and they're using the courts to crush their opposition. This has historically been the case in Thailand. Their military has always had an outsized say in the government, and they have backdoor channels of influence, like the Senate, which the military selects. It's been instrumental in crushing opposition. But this overreach also has consequences. This is subversion of democracy. It could trigger mass protests, like the ones that rocked Thailand in 2020. And all this instability is bad for business. Thailand is a country with a lot of potential, but the constant power struggles, the military versus democracy tussle, weakens Thailand's prospects. If there were political stability, Thailand could do better. Focus on boosting its economy and bettering the lives of common citizens. Hopefully, the Thai military realizes this and decides to work with opposing political parties instead of trying to oust them at every turn. For our next story, let me ask you a question. How many subscriptions do you have? If you don't have an exact number in mind, do not worry. Most of us don't. An average American, though, spends about $1,000 on subscriptions every year. Imagine that, $1,000 every year on subscriptions. It's because companies trick them. They make subscriptions easy to buy, but extremely difficult to cancel. Take Adobe, for example. The US government is suing this company for deceiving customers and making it very hard for them to cancel the subscription. But is Adobe the only one? Our next report tells you more about the subscription economy.
In the grand tapestry of modern capitalism, few things are inevitable, like death, taxes, and last but not the least, subscription fees. We're not kidding. Nothing on this earth is as permanent as a temporary subscription. And who knows that better than Adobe? Picture this. You're an aspiring graphic designer. You want to bring your creative visions to life. You sign up for Adobe's default subscription. It's quite an easy plan at first glance. You can either get a monthly or yearly subscription. It gives you access to Adobe's Creative Suite. That's Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, and others. You pay every month or year to renew access. That's the simple part. But you know what's hard? It's cancelling this subscription. Once you try, you will realize that you've entered a dragon's lair. The only way out is by facing that dragon, and that's the termination fees. It's lurking in the fine print. If you cancel the subscription, you will have to pay quite a hefty fee, and it's hidden behind optional text boxes and hyperlinks. But the struggle doesn't end there. Say you're ready to pay the hefty termination fee, but the path to that isn't easy. There are multiple web pages, hundreds of pop-ups, calls to Adobe executives, so much so that you would prefer facing an actual dragon than cancelling the subscription. But the US Justice Department is now on to Adobe. It has sued the company for hiding expensive cancellation fees, for deceiving customers, and making it extremely difficult to cancel the subscription. But while Adobe may be facing the music, it's not alone. The Justice Department's lawsuit merely shines a light on the dark underbelly of the subscription economy. In the last decade, the subscription economy has quadrupled. You find a subscription, you like it, you add your credit or debit card, and every month you're charged for it. It offers you access to premium features. It offers you convenience, but it's also very costly. Companies hike prices, and they do it very slowly. You may not even notice it at first. But suddenly you realize after a year that you're paying double for something. Plus, they're also very easy to forget. Can't read a news article? You subscribed for a free trial. Don't want to enter your credit card details every time? Get auto-renewal. All of this is draining your money. Nearly 75% consumers say they forgot about recurring monthly charges. 42% say they don't know how many subscriptions they have. They pay for it even if they're not using it. This inertia or even forgetfulness is benefiting the companies, so much so that it has boosted their revenues by 200%. All because you have forgotten about it or are too lazy to unsubscribe. It tells you a lot about the subscription economy. As the Adobe saga has shown us, remember this. In the world of subscriptions, two things are key. Read the fine print and beware of the hidden fees. If you thought breakups were hard, Try breaking up with a subscription fee.
Building something from scratch is tough. But you know what's tougher? Reviving lost glory. And that's what India is aiming to do. On Wednesday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate a new campus building, that of Nalanda University. This name is steeped in history. Nalanda is located in modern-day Bihar. It was the world's first residential university, a fountain of knowledge. We'll get to the history in a bit, but first let's look at the new building. It spans around 100 acres. It mixes two important building ideologies. One is carbon reduction. The new campus will be net zero. And the second is Vastu, an ancient Indian system of architecture. Tomorrow's event is not just an inauguration, it is also an announcement, a declaration of India's ambition to become a learning hub. And the guest list reflects that. Around 17 ambassadors are expected to attend the event. Even at the G20, India showcased Nalanda. You may remember the ceremonial dinner after the summit. Prime Minister Modi and President Murmu welcomed all the world leaders. Behind them was this backdrop, that of the ancient Nalanda University, which brings us to the history. Nalanda was founded in the year 427 by Emperor Kumaragupta. It had around 2,000 teachers. Also 10,000 students from all over the world, China, Korea, Japan, Tibet. Students came from all over. Some of India's brightest minds taught there, like Aryabhat. He is believed to have headed Nalanda in the 6th century. The university's crown jewel was its library. It had some 9 million manuscripts. They covered religion, science and medicine. But tragedy struck in the 12th century. An invader named Bakhtiyar Khilji destroyed this university. He also burned out the library. Thus, Nalanda was lost. But after independence, India began rediscovering its lost glory. Nalanda's revival was first suggested by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. He was India's president from 2002 to 2007. Upon his suggestion, the Indian government re-established Nalanda, and tomorrow the university will get a brand new campus. Like I said, it is part of India's grand plans. But grand plans often start at home. India must first build a robust domestic system, and that requires overcoming certain challenges. Tonight we're looking at 3 of them. One is the most recent one, paper leaks and exam confusion. We told you about the NEET controversy. NEET is a common entrance test for medical courses. It's been flooded by irregularities. Grace marks were awarded in a dubious manner. Paper leak is also being suspected. Remember, we are talking about an elite exam here. You must clear this test to eventually become a doctor in India. So fraud cannot be accepted. And unfortunately, this is not a one-off case. Reports say that there have been 41 paper leaks in the past 5 years. We are talking about multiple exams. Put together, they have affected 140 million students. India must work hard to correct this. Integrity of exams is a key part of learning. If you cannot guarantee that, you cannot be a learning hub. The second challenge is spending. Let's look at the last financial year. India set aside 1.6 lakh crore rupees for education. And how much did we spend? 1.08 lakh crore. So more than 7,000 crore rupees remain unspent. That's around $900 million US. India is spending around 3.5% of its GDP on education, but the national education policy has set a higher target, around 6%. 6% of the GDP on education. If India hits that, the education system will improve. We'll have better infrastructure, better paid teachers, more facilities, and of course, able students. Which brings us to the final challenge, and that is syllabus. What are you teaching your students? Just look at this report from last year. It covers engineering colleges in India. And what does it say? The syllabus has not seen major updates in 4 decades. Imagine that, 4 decades. Not many changes. India will have to work on this immediately, especially with emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. I know this sounds like a lot, but India is well placed to do this. Other countries are quite impressed by elite Indian colleges like the IITs or the Indian Institutes of Technology. India is working to set up 2 IITs abroad, one in the UAE, the other in Zanzibar. Plus, India is a free society, so foreign students can confidently come here to study. Some 46,000 of them already do that. They come from 170 countries. So like I said, India is well placed to become a learning hub. Yes, there are challenges, but India's intentions are genuine to once again become a global center of learning. And now let's talk about football, or rather, let's talk about what footballers are talking about. There's a controversy raging in France about their national football team. The team is currently in Germany, playing in the Euros. But they're keeping an eye on what's going on at home. France is headed for an election. President Emmanuel Macron called for snap polls after his party was dealt a political blow. His party was defeated in the recent European Union parliamentary elections. They were defeated by the so-called far right, France's National Rally Party. So Macron has decided to gamble everything on a snap election. But this has sent alarm bells ringing across France and in the French football team dressing room. The players are speaking out about the upcoming election, which is why there's a controversy brewing. The debate is this now: should national athletes try and influence politics? Here's our report.
The advice I have for French people is to go and vote. That's the most important thing, because an abstention rate of almost 50% isn't normal.
It's definitely something that affects us all, and I think that we should all go and vote. It's really very important.
I don't want to put my political position out there, but I think that the situation in France has got alarm bells ringing, and we need to mobilize all to get everyone out voting.
France's all-time leading goal scorer, Olivier Giroud. World Cup winner and defensive stalwart, Benjamin Pavard. Paris Saint-Germain and France winger, Ousmane Dembélé. All three of them had one message for the French people: go out and vote. These three members of the French squad are urging the French public to exercise their democratic rights, which is a good thing. So you may wonder, how could this lead to a controversy? Well, look at the next statement.
As Ousmane Dembélé said, we must go and vote. We have to tell everyone to vote. And above all, as citizens, whether it be me or you, we have to fight every day to stop it from spreading and to stop the National Rally Party from getting into power.
The French striker didn't leave any room for doubt. His message was clear: vote to keep the National Rally Party away. The National Rally is considered far right. They are Eurosceptics and staunchly anti-immigrant. This is the party that made massive gains in the recent European Union Parliament elections. They emerged as the largest French party in the EU Parliament. They won more than 31% of the vote in France. Remember, this is an anti-EU, anti-immigration party, whereas the French football team is famous for its diversity. They won the FIFA Football World Cup in 2018. They were runners-up in 2022. Both times, the team was full of children of immigrants. So of course, this French side will not like an anti-immigrant political party. No one drilled this point home like Kylian Mbappe, the French captain.
We see today that the extremists are at the gates of power. We have the opportunity to choose the future of our country. That's why I call upon the youth to go out and vote, to really be aware of the importance of this situation. I hope to use my voice as best I can, because you need to be able to identify with your country. We need to identify with our values, which are the values of diversity, tolerance, respect.
And this is what has stirred controversy. He made a not-so-subtle dig at the National Rally Party, calling them extremists. That is not the same as just encouraging people to vote. Mbappe was asking them to defeat a political party. He was taking a clear stand. And that is why a controversy has erupted. Whether you agree with his take or not, is this really a controversy? After all, people are entitled to their opinions. But somehow, opinions become a problem when it comes to famous people. They are always criticized for either taking a stand or refusing to do so. But in the end, free speech is for everyone. And it seems Mbappe would rather face criticism for exercising that right rather than remain silent.
पीछे तो वही सब। मैं त्रिपुरा से हूँ, अगरतला से। यहाँ पर शियालदा से अभी मैं सर्टिफिकेट लेने के लिए आई हूँ इधर कॉलेज से। हाँ हाँ, एडवांस यूनिवर्सिटी। हाँ, ट्रेन से पहले भी तो आई हूँ। फर्स्ट टाइम ये ऐसा तो कोई भी। अरे बहुत ही, मतलब क्या ही बोलो, कोई सोच भी नहीं सकता ना कि ऐसा कुछ हो सकता है। तो वही बहुत ही, माँ बाप भी बहुत टेंशन में है, बहुत ज़्यादा। हाँ, अभी हो रहा था ना, इसके बाद से हम जब भी आ रहे थे मैं तो सोई नहीं, बाकी मतलब ट्रेन चल रहा है फिर भी एक डर बैठ गया है ना, अभी हो सकता है ऐसा, वही सब।
हम बैठे हुए थे, लगभग आधा घंटा हुआ था, हम लोग न्यू जलपाईगुड़ी से जस्ट बैठे ही थे, अचानक जोर का झटका लगा और जब हम लोग 2 से 3 मिनट में उतर करके देखे तो एक के ऊपर एक चढ़ा हुआ था डिब्बा। मालगाड़ी पीछे से टक्कर मारी थी और जा करके देखे तो पूरा ट्रेन तहस नहस हो गया था।
Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In China, a flying car takes its first test flight. In Saudi Arabia, pilgrims hurled pebbles at a pillar in a symbolic stoning of the devil during the annual Hajj. And firefighters race to contain raging wildfires in California. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1980, Indian mathematician Shakuntala Devi set a Guinness World Record. She mentally multiplied 2 random 13-digit numbers in just 28 seconds. This included the time that she took to recite the answer. Shakuntala Devi was known as India's human computer. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
and welcome to the Late Night Edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Ladies and gentlemen, our top story after the day's programs in Kashi, Prime Minister Narendra Modi went on a surprise visit to review the work at the Stadium and Sports Complex in Varanasi. Now, once ready, it will cater to the youth and enhance sporting culture in Varanasi, which is the Prime Minister's constituency. The Prime Minister also laid the foundation stone, remember, of this entire site, this international cricket stadium back in 2023. It will be Uttar Pradesh's third international cricket stadium after Kanpur and Lucknow. Those are the visuals on your screen, ladies and gentlemen. Prime Minister Modi taking stock of the pace of the construction work at this international cricket stadium and sports complex in his seat of Varanasi. Undeterred by the reduced margin of his victory, Prime Minister Modi powering ahead with the Vikas drive in Kashi. And over there, those visuals on your screen, you can see him reviewing the work at the International Cricket Stadium and the sports complex. He laid the foundation stone for this entire site back in 2023 and now reviewing the work, the pace of the construction work in Kashi. I'm joined by my colleague Pallavi Ghosh on the broadcast. So Pallavi, on point with brand Modi when it comes to reviewing the construction work of these big projects, this one primarily in his seat of Varanasi. We saw similar scenes when it came to the construction of the new Parliament building and Prime Minister Modi leading the Vikas charge in Kashi, undeterred by his reduced margin when it comes to his third victory in Varanasi, powering ahead with the Vikas agenda.
Yes, absolutely. And also undeterred by the criticism that there has been no development in Banaras. Basically, what the Prime Minister also he's sending out is that while I do talk about Astha, he went for the Ganga Aarti. His first visit to his constituency after the election results have come out. He thanked the people, but at the same time also told them that since he was an MP from this area, their development, better opportunities is certainly going to be his focus. So what does he do? He goes and do a surprise visit to one of the areas which is going to be a stadium which is going to be built up